This is a dotCMS instance that I have running. What you see here is the homepage of one of our starters, which is just basically content and pages that we use to show dotCMS features. This page has a banner and has some widgets and some contentlets, right? And this page is being rendered with the traditional dotCMS system, which is you got a theme and you got containers with your HTML, and in that container you can say like, if you wanna render a banner, here's the HTML to render the banner, or here's the HTML to render an activity. Then you add those containers to a template, and when you drop a contentlet there, it's going to look as you define in the HTML inside the containers. Okay, this is the basic. Now, I have this Next.js app running in my local host, which is basically the exact same page, but this page is being rendered headlessly using dotCMS APIs or dotCMS REST endpoints. Starting with, and the most important one, the page API. And before you jump into headless and edit mode anywhere, you gotta understand how the page API works. So let's start right there. So I'm going to log into dotCMS, and I'm gonna go to a page. And when you are editing a page, you are going to see this button right here. And this button is a link directly to the page API for this page. And the way that the page API works is we got API v1 page. The following section of this URL is JSON or render, and then you pass the URL for the page that you want to get, right? And you can pass the language ID if you want the page in a different language, and you can pass a persona ID if you want the page for a specific persona. The response is large, but I'm gonna try to summarize it. So the first thing, there are three key things that you need to render any page in any framework. The page property, and let me make this a little bit bigger, contains the description of the page, the friendly name, the title, and all the fields in the page as a content type. Because at the end of the day, pages in .cms are just contentlets as any other framework, as any other content type or contentlet. You got the page URL, you got the page URI, so every little field is here. So this will help you, like when you're rendering a page and you want to add like OG tags or meta description and everything, or the page title in the window of the browser is right here in the page property. Then we got the layout property. And the layout property is a JSON representation of the layout of this page. It has a header or footer, which is a Boolean and true or false, and that's because a user can enable or disable the header or footer per page to a particular page or to a particular template. Then we got a body, and here is what basically everything happens, right? So here we got a rows property, which is an array of all the rows that this page contains, right? And inside each row, we got a columns property that is an array of the column inside these rows. And then inside each column, we got the containers. And the containers have the identifier and the UUID. And it has some other information, like the column have like the width percent of how width it takes, but it also have it in columns. Like this column for this row, it takes up to 12 column width. It has offsets, it has style classes if the user adds some style classes. And we got the same for each row in the page. That means that if we go here, let me make this smaller. If we go to the layout editor, this is the layout of the page. So each one of these boxes is a row, which is what each of one of these rows right here. And then each one of these one are the boxes that holds the containers. In this case, each box has one container, but you can have more containers in a box. That's why everything is an array, because it's like an array of rows, then an array of boxes, then an array of containers. So that's the second piece that you have to care about. And the last piece is the containers. Remember that in the layout, we have inside the containers, we have an identifier and a UUID. This is a reference to the containers right here. All right, so this is the idea of the container. And here we can look in the contentlets, we can look for the UUID that we're getting in the layout. And here is where the contentlets itself live, right? So the way that normally we work is like when we are trying to render in a page, we go to the body. For each row, we render a component for a row. And then inside that component, we render a column for each column and we style the width and the position of those columns with the width and the offset. And finally, when we want to go and get the content, we use the containers identifier and UUID to go and basically look for that content inside the ID of the container. And inside the containers, we have the UUID. And here are the containers in the page. So if the content is a banner, all the properties from the banner are here. And another important piece is that each container have a property content type with a field variable of the content type. And we use that as a reference to get or to use a specific component for each content type, right? So if I'm using Angular or React or any other framework, I create a component named activity. And I know that the activity will have a title and a body and an image. And I write the HTML and the CSS for that component to display the activity as I want to. So this is the page API have more things. It has information about the site and the template and the view as and everything. But these three, the page, the layout, and the containers are the three properties inside this response that you're going to use to render any page in the system. Any questions regarding the page API so far?
It makes sense so far.
So now let me go here to the content. So as you can see here, we are editing the page that I'm rendering with Next.js that I showed you before. But in order for us to get that page here in the editor, we need to tell dotCMS, hey, dotCMS, I want you to edit this page in this server. In this case, it's localhost, but it could be anything. So in order to do that, you got to go to apps, and you're going to find an app that is called Edit Mode Anywhere Next. And inside here, you're going to list all your sites. In this case, I'm using the demo.cms site, which is the current site that I'm here. And inside here, you can pass a configuration object. And that configuration object is where you tell .cms, hey, .cms, I want to edit my pages with this web app or this URL, this Next.js app, right? And this configuration object basically is a config property with an array, and that array have an object, and the object have the property pattern, which is a regex that .cms is going to match the URL that you're trying to edit it against. So that way you can tell .cms, this URL, I want to edit it with this web app. That means that because it's an array, I can do something like this, and I can say, okay, if the page is /docs or start with /docs, I want to edit that with, let's say, I don't know, maybe something like, docs mywebapp.com, right? So it's not all the pages. You can say you want to edit all the pages with this web app, or you want to edit specific patterns or specific folders or even specific files with this other web app, which allows you to basically edit specific pages in .cms, and you don't have all or nothing, right? So if I remove this config from here, right, which is I have to come here and delete it from the site, and I try to edit a page. In this case, you will see the same one because I have a feature flag because we're moving this to the new editor, but we have older version of the editor that is not showing right now, but that's fine. Okay, so now, how do you render a page with Next.js? So in our repo inside .cms, we have a Next.js example. So if you go to the repo, which is .cms/core, there is a folder called EMA, and inside that folder, we got Vue.js and Next.js. The Vue.js example is there, but it's not working with edit mode anywhere yet. We're working on it. The Next.js example, it is ready, which is the one that I'm showing you that I'm running in localhost 1000. So basically, you can clone this. You can edit the local.example file here. You should rename it to m.local without the example. And you need to bring the .cms token and the .cms instance that will be your .cms source of data, right? And then you run this in Next.js, and you should be good to go. Now, let me open that in my editor. And this is the file that I was just showing you. In this case, I already have a m.local file. And here is my dotCMS token. And here is my dotCMS instance, which is localhost 8080. To get the token, you can go to your dotCMS instance and go to users. And you find the user that you want to create the token for. In my case, I'm using an admin because it's the user that has more permissions. And then you can go to API access token and you hit request a new token, you set a name, it could be anything, and then you hit OK, and then this is your token. You gotta make sure that you copy it because one is closed. I think, oh no, you can still get it from here, right? And then you can get this token, put it here, and Next.js will use that token for authorization for the request to the page API, okay? Any questions so far here?
No, that's clear to me.
Okay, so now the way that, in short, the way that Next.js works is inside the app folder, you create another folder and you put a page.tsx inside or JSX, what you're using, depending, and that will create a new route, right? So I can come here and say, for example, about me slash page.jsx, and literally this create a path or the route about me, and I can go localhost 3000 slash about me, and I will see whatever I render in this React component, right? Now, what's the thing with that? That's cool and everything, but the fact is that content creators and page editors can create the .cms route if they go to the site browser. Here I can create my route and my pages, right? So I can literally come here and say add new folder, and I can say about me, and I can show a menu, and then inside about me I can create a new page, and this page could be, let's give it a second. I can set about me and make it index, and I created a new page, right? But the thing with this approach is that when a content creator creates a new page in .cms, I will have to go, as a developer, I will have to come here and create it and create a folder in order to generate a new route in Next.js. And we don't want that. We don't want a developer involved every time a content creator creates a new page, right? So to overcome that, what we are doing is we're using a feature of Next.js, which is part of the dynamic routes, which is the catch all routes, right? And the syntax is double bracket, dot, 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 and the name that you want to use. In my case, I use slug, but it could be anything. And inside this folder, I create my page.js. What this is doing is that all the pages, everything, all the pages inside localhost 3000, everything out from here, it could be like this, like as many level as we want. So it's gonna literally catch all the routes, will be rendered with this component, with this page component, right? That means that a content creator can go to the .cms instance, create a new folder, create a new page, and you as a developer will not have to do anything in order to show that page in your front end, right? Any questions so far?
Not yet, no.
Okay, cool. Now, this page needs some special sauce in order to work that way, right? Because it's not just like out of the box. So the first thing that we need to do is, okay, I'm trying to render this page, but what is the data? The data lives in .cms, so we need to use the page API to go and fetch for that data, right? To get the page information, the layout information, and the containers with the contents. In order to do that, you can do a regular fetch to the request to the, slash API slash B1 page, but we are providing a JavaScript SDK, and one of those libraries is the .cms client library. That library is a wrapper around the page API and the navigation API to facilitate developers to use those APIs. So instead of you have to create the whole URL with the query params and everything, you just use your library and it's easier for you to go and fetch the page API. So you import this object from the library and you got a call, and this is the first step. You have to do this. You have to initiate the client and you have to pass the following properties: the .cms URL, out token, And because, of course, this is secret, we can just put a string here. So we're using the environmental variables that we define in the m.local file. The same with the Next.js, sorry, the next public dotCMS host is the dotCMS URL. Then you pass the site ID. The site ID, you can get it from dotCMS. You can go to sites right here, and the site that you want to interact with, that you want to get pages from, you can edit it. And right here in the history tab, you got the identifier of that site. If you don't pass one, what is going to happen is that dotCMS is going to fall back to the default site, okay? And the last option is a request options. And these request options are options that you can pass to the fetch request, to the fetch API request. So under the hood, this library use the native fetch API for Node.js and the browser. And you can pass here some options. In my case, for example, I'm invalidating the cache because because I'm working on edit mode, I want fresh data every time. And of course, I'm adding a comment here saying like in production, you might want to deal with this differently. Maybe we can use an environmental variable to check if we are in production or in dev mode. And based on that, we set the catch differently.
A question, Freddie.
Go ahead.
What if I want to get pages from multiple sites? Is that possible?
If you want to get pages for multiple sites, you are going to need to initialize multiple clients.
Okay.
Passing different sites IDs. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. So the next thing is this, we're exporting this function. This is our Next.js function that is called generate metadata. And basically it allows you to set all the metadata information on the page. Right now, I'm only doing the title, but you can pass here description, OG tags, fav icons, pretty much everything that is set in the metadata. This is the way that Next.js do this. You can either do it with a function if you need to go and fetch some data, or you can just export a property. In my case, because I'm trying to get the page title from the page API, I'm using this function, right? So the title of the page is coming dynamically from the page API. And this is where we do that right here. So basically we initialize the client, right? Which is this one right here. And now this client have a page object that have a get method. So that's literally from the page API, get a page. And this function or this method receive an object with the path. So the path that you want to, the path of the page that you want to fetch, the language ID, and the persona ID, right? Right now, I'm getting all that information from the search params, because in the editor, in the editor inside .cms, we are passing those query params. These are query params, and we are passing those so we can get it from there, right? We are doing this from the slug, the path, only from the slug, but the language ID and the persona IDs are coming from the search param. This slug right here coming from the params is called a slug because we name it the folder slug. But this is named differently. The params will not be slug, will be whatever name you add here, right? So this slug right here is the URL in the localhost. So if I do here like localhost 3000/about me, this right here is going to come in this log. So that's Next.js routing system, basically. And then I'm returning the title. And I'm saying that if the page have a friendly name, use that one. If it doesn't have a friendly name, because the friendly name is not a required field in the page, use the page title, which is actually a required field, right? Then we got to explore the React function that is going to be the one rendering the page. So in this case, we're doing, again, a request to get the page API, the same as here. And you don't have to like worry about performance because Next.js catch those requests. And all this is happening server side in Next.js. So this is not client side. And the other request that I'm doing is in the client, we also have available the navigation API. And in the nav object, you got the get function or method where you can pass the path where you want the navigation to start from, the depth, and the language ID. Also, and it's worth to mention, all these client functions are very well documented. You can hover and you can see how it works. And it tells you the parameters. You have links to the .cms documentation, etc. The same with the navigation API, right? And the last piece of the puzzle at least for now, in this page, it's like, okay, I need to return a React component that is going to actually render the page. So I create this my page component, and I'm passing the navigation API response and the page API response, right? So now this is just a React component, but this one is client side, right? And this one is client side on purpose because this one needs to be used client side because we have some functionality to communicate with the editor that needs to happen in the client. So we use state and use ref, which are React hooks that needs to get executed in the client. Okay, and this is a regular, normal React component that receives the page API in the data and the navigation, and basically start rendering the HTML based on this information. For example, if the layout header is true, we render our header component with a navigation component. And that navigation component, it takes items, which is the navigation items. In the footer, we do the same thing. The footer is not receiving anything because it's just like, copyright and stuff like that. And then we got this component that is called .cms layout. And this component .cms layout is part of our SDK, which is coming from .cms Next.js. Okay. This component basically takes two things. It takes the page API response, all of it together. Even though it doesn't use everything, we just pass in everything. We're not sharing like blocking anything around. And then, and this is where the magic happens, it takes a components object, and here in this component object is a key value where the key is the content type variable, and the value is the component, the React component that you want to use to render the pieces of content of this type, right? So if it's a web page content, I'm going to use this web page content component. If it's a banner, I'm going to use this banner component, right? And once we pass this, that's pretty much it. This component under the hood, all the all the rendering of the rows and the column and making sure they have the right width and the right offset and everything happens inside here. So you don't have to care about that. You don't have to write CSS to make sure that the grid system is working on everything. We already take care of that inside this .cms layout. The only thing that you have to care about is give me the React components that you want to use to render each piece of content in this page, right? If you don't know, for whatever reason, you don't know which pieces of content are going to be in a particular page, you can go to, let's say I want to edit a page. Let me just bring back the configuration, apps. So you can come here and you can edit a piece of content, right? And right here, you can see what content type that is, right? That content type is a banner, right? And then here you can see, okay, you have a title, you have an image, you have a caption, a button text, a link, a text color, and all those properties are coming back in the response of the page API. And when we're using these components inside the .cms layer, we're going to pass the full content layer. That means, like, for example, if we go and we open the banner, see that the banner in the props of the React component is going to be able to get the title, the image, the caption, the button text, the link. All those are properties, the title, the caption, the image that are here. And with this information, you can write HTML to render that banner using any CSS framework that you want, any React components that you want, and just adding the HTML as you want to. So far, any questions?
Yeah, a couple questions. The first one, do we allow the content creator to pass local CSS to a content type?
Local CSS, do you
Let's
mean
say
like,
this banner, I didn't like the way it looked on my visual editor, and I want to change the color of the title or something like that. Or
well, this is local CSS, right? The only thing that is using Tailwind. So for example, this one has a background purple 500, right? Let's say that the designers say that they don't want purple, they want blue. So basically you can come here and change blue and blue here. And if I save this, and if this is running and I go back to my page and well, it's already refreshed because Next.js is running under the hood. So now this button is blue. If I want to make it green, now it's green. So the CSS that I'm using here is Tailwind, and Tailwind have these classes and everything. But if it was like, I can in Next.js, I can do like import. I can import CSS like, I don't know, maybe like if I have a folder styles global.css. And then if this one have a bunch of classes, I can use my custom classes right here and everywhere, right? In this case, I don't have that because I'm using Tailwind. But yeah, you have access to modify. I mean, the look and feel of each piece of content is up to you as a developer. We
Got
don't
it.
mess with
Okay.
that. And the other
Now,
question is,
yeah, if you go back to how you map the components,
okay, right here.
what if the content creator just wanted to add, let's say, text, like raw text to a page? Would
Mhm.
this catch that or no?
Depends, because you can in dotCMS, every piece of content that you add, even if it's raw text, needs to be inside a contentlet. It has to be a contentlet. And in order to be a contentlet, it has to be a content type. So the way that you do that, let's say that, well, for example, the web page content is a typical content that we have that is pure text. But let's do something. Let's go to content types and let's create a new piece of content type that is going to be called raw text, right? And let's add a text field right here, and let's gonna call it content, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a piece of content of this new content type. So I'm gonna come here and I'm going to add here, this is my raw text content. So I'm going to create a raw text container, and I'm gonna say that I can add 10 items. Instead of activities, I'm going to add raw text, and I'm gonna save this container. And now if I go to page, this is the raw text container. So now I do have the raw text because I create a specific container for that, and I'm going to select it. So now what's the thing? I create a new content type and I don't have a React component for raw text in my Next.js app, right? So every time you create a new content type or your content architecture create a new content type, that's when you have to go and touch code, right? So what I need to do here is I'm going to create here I'm going to create a new, I'm going to save this as the variable name of that content type is raw text. So I can copy it from here and I can create that. And I know that the property is called content. So I can copy it from here. So I'm going to receive content. And then I'm going to, I don't need this. I'm going to do this and I'm going to set here text red 500, right? So I create a new content type called raw text, but I haven't passed it here. So now I need to raw text, pass it here, and I can import the component raw text from, let me just copy this, and I'm going to raw text. Now that I did this, if I save, and I go back to the page, now you can see that this is my component. And I can keep like, okay, I don't want this, I want like border. And now I have a border right there. I can say border, red, 500, padding 9 or something like that. Now that's my component rendering that new piece of content type.
Got it. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions?
Nope.
Cool. Okay, that's pretty much the whole flow with our demo. Anything else?
No, not right now.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let me know if anything else comes up. I'm here to help. And we keep making this better and better. Right now, we're working on merging the two editors together so that you can either edit headless pages or traditional pages in the same editor. So we're working on that. And hopefully, we will be able to add more items to our SDK, like libraries for other frameworks and more examples and more documentation.